Okay. Well, greetings, everybody. I'd like to thank Dr. Zubrin for inviting me back this year to talk about more things that can really fall into the topic of politics in space and how we have to use that to get what we want. So, Artemis, you've of course heard all the everything about it. You probably know as much or more about it, and some of you are actual rocket scientists. And so you would know more about it than I, because I'm the political guy. My background has been public policy. I used to work for a member of Congress who represented the Johnson Space Center, and then I run and founded in 2010 a nonprofit organization to promote space on the political end. We here in the Mars Society are often promoting it on the more technical end. You know, what is the best way to get to Mars? How to live on Mars? I want to help you all get there. And the best way that I can is to offer a little bit of roadmap on the political course. At 4 o'clock, I'll be giving another talk on more focused on the politics of space. And so I invite you to come to that too. Artemis, why is this different? Thank you. Why is this different from all the other failed programs? Constellation, efforts to continue Apollo and beyond its expiration in 72, things like that. And there's really a few items. The first is tight deadlines. 2024, the date that has been selected to reach the moon on Artemis, and the date that I provided some space policy advice to the Trump campaign and to the transition and then to the White House. And my number one message was always, you have to set 2024 as the deadline for going to Mars. Now, this is a mistake that President Bush made. President Bush in 2003, he stood at Kitty Hawk and he said, we'll be going back to the moon with Constellation. Now, this was a time of record deficits. Earmarks. If you were a member of Congress, you could say, I want a road in my district, and you write it into the bill. And everyone else supported that because wink, wink, nod, nod, they're getting a road in their district too. And so that was a time in which President Bush actually could have doubled the budget. He could have tripled it. And he could have said something, I've figured out how to put something in every congressional district for Constellation and every state. And he could have done that, but he didn't for whatever reason. Maybe it was the Iraq War. Maybe it was, who knows. But Dr. Zubrin actually counseled him on the exact same thing. You've got to get Constellation to the moon by 2008. And he didn't. And so then it was so slow rolled that we didn't have one piece of hardware to keep the program alive. The next president killed it, and there were plans to return to the moon and go on to Mars from there, and we had chaos. We're building capabilities to sometime, somewhere, go someplace. Then we're going to go to an asteroid and bring the whole thing back. That won't work. Okay, so then we'll go to send a robot to it, and we'll bring back a little piece of it the size of this desk or a VW or something. And we'll send in the far out year of 2028, we will send a one mission that's sole purpose is to go out to this brought back piece of a asteroid, chip off some pieces, put it in the capsule, and come back home. And that would have been our space program for the, for what would have been 10, 15 years. And so that's been the legacy that we're building on. Then it was at the end of the previous administration, it was we're going to build a gateway, but we have zero plans to build a lander. We're just going to the gateway, and we'll be orbiting it, first-class seating, spectator seating to watch China build their lunar base and anyone else, but no plans to land. So then this president said, actually, the real credit, it goes to Mike Pence, it goes to Jim Bridenstine, it goes to Scott Pace, because they realized the necessity to harness political rules. So if you have tight deadlines, you can actually make it. Elon Musk, just a couple of weeks ago, if the schedule is long, it's wrong. If it's tight, it's right. He was talking about that on Starship. But it's so true. If President Kennedy had said, we will go to the moon sometime in this century, we never would have gone. They never would have been able to make that deadline. They'd still be working on Apollo 1 right now. It would be on, down there, and okay, we're modifying the, this module, and we're doing that, and we're going to get it ready, we promise, before 2069, or something like that. But no, he said this decade. That made it real. That made it believable to the public. So that when he, and then what followed? Lots of launches. This is what kept the program alive. You had Mercury, you had Gemini, you had Apollo, all the way up to Apollo 11, and then, of course, continued on. But these are the drivers of what kept the public and Congress involved, because they saw a payout. I was growing up in that era. I was sitting on the floor in the living room watching Neil Armstrong take that first step. And I watched various Geminis and so forth. And there was an average of 3 a year between 61 and 72. And that kept the public interested. So we've had really nothing. If you want to see a space launch with people in it, you have to go to Kazakhstan. And that's not quite as easy as flying Spirit or something to Orlando and driving an hour and then cheering them on. People matter. That's something some forget. We can explore the universe and Mars and Moon with safe robots, and we'll never have to send a human. The public doesn't like that. They don't get that excited. I was at the last shuttle launch. Welcome, coming in. The last shuttle launch where there was, 2 or 3 million people lining the Space Coast to watch the launch. And they wouldn't have done that, even for something like Curiosity or, the first Falcon 9 launch. You got, maybe a couple thousand people or things like that to view those, but not millions, because it's people that people like to watch. So the tight deadlines is a very, very valuable thing. Now, commercial partners are in the loop far more than ever before. It's going to be a privately built lander that lands on the moon. It's not going to be a NASA lander. They're obviously, the Apollo lander was built by, Grumman and things like that, but it was done on contract for NASA. It was NASA's and NASA's alone. They couldn't keep building them and selling them to, some tourist company to land tourists on the moon. And New Space is a lot more aggressive. If any of you watched Elon Musk talk about Starship just the other day, then, he's sitting there saying, well, we're going to, in a month, we're going to be launching the first stainless steel one, and then Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV, and eventually get to orbit in 6 months. Well, that's not going to happen in that time frame. But what he does do when he's not, saying, we'll be living on Mars in a couple of years, is he is building things darn fast. I was at a launch once, and a SpaceX launch, and I was in with the SpaceX, crowd. That's when I was working in Congress, and so I was right there with Gwen Shotwell and others, and they scrubbed the launch for the day, and Shortly after, they came back and they said, we found the problem. Elon has signed off on the fix. We're launching again tomorrow. And that's the way he thinks. That's the way a lot of New Space thinks. And so whether it's a Blue Origin lander or, you know, anything else that's going to be a part of Artemis, they're going to be working a lot more energetically and aggressively than legacy ones that have taken how long to make one single SLS and one flyable Orion. I don't really blame the companies as much as I do the politicians and NASA and the bureaucracy. But another interesting thing that tight deadlines do is they blow away all the barriers. Bridenstine is an amazing man. I knew him a little bit in Congress, and he's very driven and dedicated. And he's done some unpopular things. He demoted Gerstenmaier. Many in this room know him, and I think the absolute world of him. But the thought was that he was demoted because he was sort of too focused on process and safety and you know, okay, this won't be ready until 2049 or whatever. And Bridenstine's thinking more like Apollo. And Gemini and President Kennedy. It's like, what do we got to do to get this to the moon? So, why do we want to go to the moon? Well, of course, a big part of that is it's where the water is, it's where the ice is. But this also brings about another reason that 2024 is more than a casual deadline. It's more than even a political deadline. Sure, this president, if reelected, would love to see be in office as the first woman and the next man steps on the surface of the moon. Most likely, he won't be. Most likely, it'll happen 25, 26 or something like that. But it's a beautiful gift to the next president, and that will tend to buy in future presidents who can say, you know, I'm going to talk about this in my campaign. I will be the one who has the accomplishment of the moon. It's a beautiful gift. But there's another reason, and this is strategic, because there's actual dangers in folks that want the water ice, and that's China. This is a quote by the chief commander of China's lunar program. The universe is like the ocean. The moon is like the Diao Islands, and Mars is like Huangyang Island. That's war talk, really, if you think about it, because those names are not just names of, starfish and whales. No, they're names of the islands in the South and East China Sea that China has been working very aggressively and militarily to seize in violation of the Law of the Sea Treaty. So if this is a strategic warning to back off, and I suspect they might even have told this White House and previous White House, the moon's ours. We want certain areas. We want the water-rich craters. You can have, in effect, the desert land of Tranquility Base, but and you don't need guns on the moon to enforce it. Even if you put ICBMs on the moon, it takes a hell of a long time. You see, you have plenty of warning. But all you need to do is say, you want rare earth minerals? You're not going to the South Pole of the moon. And you just say it on a phone call or a little secret letter transmitted from Xi Jinping to the president or something. That's how that sort of stuff is done. But Bridenstine and Mike Pence and Scott Pace, they realized the strategic necessities, because if China were to seize, there's only a few square miles And if you say this is our operating area, and even within the the Outer Space Treaty, well, this is just simply the area we've mapped out, we've invested in it, and this is ours, and you can have all of the desert regions and content yourself with looking at Tranquility Base forever. So because it's such a small bit, that they might actually do that, and if we're to believe they won't, they're setting up, for example, in the South China Sea. So there's strategic necessities to do this. And they're working very aggressively. They've got 2 rovers on the moon, the latest one being on the far side, where it's finding all sorts of remarkable and cool-looking stuff. But whenever they get their Long March 5 rocket, their sort of generally Falcon 9 comparable rocket, back to flight because it had engine problems, then they're going to be landing a rover on the where? South Pole of the moon, and then follow within about a year or so a sample return mission, like bringing water ice back from Shackleton Crater to China. And so they're working very strategically. They're building their SLS. Oh, look up the Long March 5. It's remarkably similar. It looks like somebody took a SLS and they put it on a Xerox machine. And it probably is stolen plans, like their stealth fighters, J-20, and all sorts of other things that they plunder from us and then put into mass production. And so this is a slide from a Chinese presentation at a lunar exploration conference, I think last year. And they're talking about basically research station. And this is the overlay here. And that area there points to, I think it's off screen, but 2025. So they're thinking about actually having Chinese on the moon about the same time that now we are. So the race is on. And to the winner go the spoils, but it doesn't have to be that way. It really is a race for protecting access to the strategic areas of the moon. The only places that really matter is the North and South Pole, because that's where the ice is. And if we are there, if our national flag is there, that protects the access for everyone, because they won't dare claim that whole region. They may say, okay, well, there's this one little crater, not Shackleton, but it's right next to it, and this is going to be our base of operations, and you can have other things. And that's fine, because, you know, the moon is everybody's. So I encourage a Chinese lunar base and an EU base, Moon Village, and everybody else. India is really coming on strong in their space program. So this will be where humanity lives, the South Pole, for a long, long time. So they can have their base as long as we can too, and everybody can. That's what it's really all about, protecting that access, restraining China's worst ambitions. And so if we are in a space race, hey, amen, race is on. So what's another secret to making Artemis work for 2024 or thereabouts? And of course it is politics, because the rocket science is relatively easy compared to the political science of this. We could have gone back to the moon at any time post-Apollo. I mean, 50 years ago we learned how, right? Shouldn't be that tough. So there's a few things we can do, but one thing is that let them play politics. Let the politicians claim the credit. When you're sitting on Mars, you're not really going to care who was standing saying, I helped make this happen. You won't. It'll be there 50 years from now. It'll be kind of forgotten who made that happen. But it'll be everybody's legacy. So it's a good thing to have an administration eager to have space accomplishments as their legacy. And if this president isn't returned to the White House next year, then, hopefully the next president will pick up this prepackaged landing. A few other things. Because this is the presidential campaign's already rolling and the congressional campaigns will be starting in earnest in January. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this at 4 o'clock, but go out and meet the candidates, particularly if you go to early primary states. They're there already, and they're often doing very small meetings, sometimes as small as this here, where you can go up to any of the challenger candidates and talk to them, or their senior staff, and say, we have to get to the moon by Mars by 2033 or whatever. And so these are just a few things. Go to a congressional campaign event. You'll probably meet the congressman, congresswoman, and their senior staff, and get to know them. Again, I'm going to be talking more about this at 4 o'clock. So happy to have you all join in. It's just a little bit of the. Now, there's a lot of things I don't like about Artemis. It's ultra complicated. We did Apollo one rocket for one landing. They're talking about 3 to launch the landers, thanks to the Gateway, which you all heard the debate last night. But in a way, I think Bridenstine is doing kind of the right thing as much as he can. He scaled it back, so we don't have to wait till the year 2028 or something for the Gateway to be finished before we then step down on the moon. He scaled it back. And I can understand there's a lot of planning that went into all of that. But he said that you can, if you're putting in a bid for a lunar lander, you don't have to make it go to the lander, to the Gateway first. You can have it go directly to the moon. So, and hopefully this is where we'll be in 2024. So at this point, we got a few minutes. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Yes.
I'm curious as to why an organization like Mars Society doesn't approach the United Nations and talk to them and say, hey, we want world support on this. We're a world organization. We don't want this thing to get out of control like you're talking about.
Well, the United Nations has never lifted a finger on the South China Sea, and so they're pretty worthless when it comes to doing things like that. I agree; they should be. They should be saying.
Or at least have it on paper that somebody's speaking up.
Yeah, I like the idea, and it's essentially a useless organization for that kind of purpose in their track record. Next question.
There's a date. Is there really a plan? I mean, there's a launch vehicle, but there's really no way to land, right?
Oh, they're taking bids, and the bids will be closing fairly rapidly. I don't know, a few months or something for the lander. So whoever is bidding on landers, and I'm sure Blue Origin and a bunch of others are, they're gearing up their plans for the landers. Yeah, this is a serious plan, a lot more serious than people think, and probably, from what I hear, there's a lot of thought by Bridenstine and some of those other folks too. We want to see that Starship fly because we want to discard SLS. So I think there may be some fun surprises in here that everyone will cheer. Yeah.
Well, looks like from your speech it all sounds like there's a clear opposition line between U.S. and China, same as it happens with the Soviet Union half a century ago. The point is, why it's not possible to cooperate with China, share expenditures, and make things possibly easier or expand vision, or it's a matter of political will. right?
Well, it's a couple of things. Number one, there is a law preventing cooperation between China and the U.S. On space because they plunder technology and steal it for their own military purposes, and that is their MO. It's what they do. But also, China is the most nationalistic country, perhaps since, I don't know, Nazi Germany or something, because if you're in China, you're raised there, you are taught the Han race is the supreme race, the master race, and they want to do everything themselves. Their space station that they will be launching perhaps this coming year, once Long March 5 is back in service, they're not billing it as the an international space station. It's our Chinese space station. So it's kind of both sides. They don't want it. We don't want it. Yes.
You mentioned something about going to the moon and bypassing Gateway. Could you explain to me how that would go about and where would it land?
You would simply build a lander that is you can go, as Dr. Zuberman was saying last night. You can go to the moon without the gateway to the South Pole. South Pole is where we're going. That's the strategic thing. That's where we'll have the water ice for future of mankind. But you don't need the gateway to do it. You just build a lander that's capable of it, a lighter weight one than what they're proposing. I guess we have time for like one more question or something. Yeah.
What's the funding status? I guess Congress is dragging their feet and giving the extra money.
Oh my God, they are, and it's awful. It's all partisan. The House is saying we're not in a space race. There's no reason to hurry. That was Eddie Bernice Johnson, chairwoman of the Space Subcommittee. And so they don't, what it really is a politics thing. They don't want to let this president have that victory. And so they will do anything it takes. They would destroy the whole program to deny it.
Is that going to sabotage this whole...
I don't know. I mean, I think Bridenstine, he understands that and the difficulties, and will be working to try to find other ways to do it, cost cutting and so forth, to operate within the existing. But anyway, I think that's all the time we have for now, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm around with the rest of the conference.